Hello, everybody. This is episode 228. We're recording this live on December 9th, 2021. This is Human Factors Cast. I'm your host, Nick Roome. I'm joined today by Mr. Barry Kirby.
Hello. Isn't it great to be here again?
It is great to be here again. No time travel this week.
No.
We do have a great show for you all tonight. We're going to be talking about the Mars mission and how the astronauts are worrying scientists by increasing their autonomy in remote isolation. And later, we're going to answer some questions from the community about mustering up the motivation to work on your tasking, how to negotiate salary through counter offers, and how to deal with difficult clients who don't know what they want. But first, let's get some programming notes out of the way. First up, I just want to talk quickly about our holiday schedule for everyone's awareness here. Next week, the 16th, we're going to have a normal show. It's going to be Barry and myself hanging out here like we normally do. You can find us streaming if you want to join us there for one last push before the holidays. We do have holiday music now to accompany our pre and post show. We on the 23rd, we're going to be off for the holidays. No show that week. But then we'll be back on the 30th, which will be our last show of 2021. And we're going to be recapping every single Human Factors news story of 2021. So if there's anything that slipped through our cracks, we only cover one show a week here. So there's a lot that we may have missed. So please join it. I need a total count. Maybe I'll have that for you all next week. Or at the end of that show. Maybe you'll have to tune in. Anyway, and then we'll be back on January 6th. So that's our upcoming schedule. Another programming note here, social thoughts. Those are out there. We're now calling them You Choose the News. And we had our first one this last week. Everyone voted on Twitter. And this story actually won by a pretty large margin across both our patrons and our Twitter poll. So if you want a voice in choosing what goes on the show, we're giving 20% of the total vote to our broader listener base. So there's that. We're also still producing these TMCs, Human Factors Minutes. We got 2 more left. And we have some, we have a lot of different voices in there. We're trying to get a bunch of different people from our lab to read these things, so it's not just me droning on. And last but not least, next Friday, December 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to be moderating an HFES presidential town hall. So I'm going to be with Chris Reed and Carolyn Summerich about Human Factors, latest Human Factors industry news and trends. And it's just an opportunity to talk to the folks behind HFES and see what's up. So if you have questions, I think the HFES folks put that on their Twitter, and you can reach out to them directly with questions. Anyway, that's that part of the show where we get into the news. So let's just get into the news. That was a bad transition. Yes, this is the part of the show all about Human Factors news. Barry, what's our story this week?
Our story this week is looking at a simulated Mars base that got kind of rebellious and it's been worrying scientists. So early this month, 6 people began their tenure in an immense experiment. It's either your greatest dream or your worst nightmare. They're living in a simulated extraterrestrial colony whilst being monitored by its builders. It's all part of Project Sirius, an 8-month off-world settlement experiment taking place in Moscow. Among those analysing the specifics, one research team has noted 2 striking outcomes. Members of the Off-Earth Society have been growing increasingly autonomous, and they progressively communicated their feelings less often with mission control. At face value, strong independence seems really a promising thing to have in a potential Martian society. So if settlers perceive full control of their mission, they'd function confidently on their own and work collaboratively, drawing their comfort with each other. They could benefit later interplanetary endeavors by easing individual anxiety and enhancing group cohesion for carrying out protocols, which makes sense. But on a deeper level, letting go of mission control's hands invites some challenges. It's been said that the negative side is that the mission control loses the possibility to understand the needs and problems of the crew, which consequently hinders mission control's ability to provide support. And then if they take that a step further, if the crew achieves a super high level of autonomy and cohesion, there's another potential concern. They might seek complete detachment from external governing structures. Basically, they're worried about humans that are situated on Mars revolting from Earth. So the crews in the simulated missions tend to reduce their communication with mission control during the isolation, and that's been the main outcomes of that project. Sharing their needs and problems less and less, with rare exceptions such as really mission critical events like landing simulations and things. So that could be quite an interesting outcome and something to bear in mind for future Mars missions. What do you think of that, Nick?
Look, I think I think it poses a very real challenge of being isolated on a remote base on another planet far away from home where communication with mission control is extremely delayed. Do I see a mutiny forming against Earthlings? Hell no. This is not. Look, you're telling me that a crew of like 6 people on Mars are gonna go, nah, Earth, we don't need we don't need y'all. No way. No way. It just seems a little bit of a ridiculous stretch to me to talk about that. But I thought this would be a good story to talk about in the sense of what sort of impacts isolation and confinement have on astronauts and sort of the human factors issues about spaceflight, kind of remote bases, that type of thing. But I'm curious what your initial thoughts on this article are, Barry.
Well, quite frankly, talking about anything about going to Mars, and I'm there. In fact, I'll go to Mars. I'm completely down with that. I think it's really interesting because it does delve into some of the deeper psyche of the human condition, because there's so many movies and stuff around there around going to Mars and what happens if you go out alone and you get stuck there. The Martian is a really good example, and others to boot. But it does give you that idea about what would you do if you're in that position of being isolated, and if you find that you can survive on your own. And like I said, happening on the first mission, unlikely, but it does sort of raise the point that we assume that Mars will just be an off-world colony. When it gets to a certain point, it's going to have its own autonomy. There's going to be that level of it. And will we be happy to say, yeah, Mars, you go ahead and do your own thing? So I think it's a future problem. I don't think it's going to happen next. I don't think it's something that Elon Musk is worrying about right now when he sends his first Starship up there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, yes, it could be. I think the transition to independence is going to be a larger discussion about when that happens and how that happens. But yes, I don't think it's going to happen within the first couple missions, and it's so odd that we're seeing that with this group here, that's doing these tests here on Earth, and I'm wondering if that's just because they know they're here on Earth. I mean, simulations can be incredibly realistic, but at the same time, like in the back of their head, they have to know they are here, and that if anything goes wrong, it's not going to be the end of their world, right?
Yeah, I think in many ways it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because it's almost, no matter where as soon as you cut off isolation from people, it does have dramatic effects and impacts into our cells. And if this is, it's an 8-month experiment, but actually they've only just kind of started it, and they've already seen this element of people trying to look after themselves a bit more, I guess. And it works both ways. So we've obviously looked at this from would the users work, move away from that controlling hand of mission control, but also does it speak a lot about the way that we use mission control as well, and the fact that they feel that they have to control every single aspect of what's going on, and maybe that we need to change the way we're thinking about that as well. So no, I think there are.
Yeah.
We can talk about a whole lot of stuff here, but actually there's some real significant human factors issues.
Yeah,
And that's
let's talk about some of the human factors issues. I think there's the obvious human factor stuff that I feel like we bring up a lot of time, but it's absolutely mission critical that we bring that stuff up to revisit it within the context of each of these news stories, because they take on different meanings, right? So if you think about some of the obvious human factors applications like cognition, you're trying to, as an astronaut on a Mars base, you're trying to understand situation awareness, And I think that's something that mission control largely doesn't have awareness on. They're trying to get that information from the people who are there. And so if there's, obviously two groups of users here, much more subgroups if you want to look at it that way, but you have the astronauts and you have mission control, and mission control is trying to get as much SA, situation awareness, on what's going on in the environment as they can, and their direct link is with the astronauts. There's obviously other instrumentation that will provide data as well, and they get that, but to really have that context of what's going on, that's going to be critical. Now, there's also other things that are fairly obvious as well. There's going to be cognitive workload associated with the astronauts. Maybe they feel like they're too busy to communicate with mission control because they're so focused on the tasking that they need to do. And then you also have sort of the usability and effectiveness of these interfaces that they're using remotely. And if they don't need help using those things, they're going to be less likely to reach back to mission control. So maybe I'm just thinking here, and this is kind of jumping into the application a little bit, but maybe the design of these things requires permission from mission control to use them in certain cases. Like you need a signal from Earth to use some things, so that way it encourages communication back and forth. Anyway, that's just like high level stuff. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about from the basic human factors issues with some of this stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's hit the you just talked about the level of support there. So let's talk about mission support. So we've really got to have a decent understanding of all the human controlled components and basically the task analysis, if you will. Really looking at at decomposing them so there's no surprises. And even if there's no real, the communications level get lower, because we've got really good understanding of the tasks and the both the automated ones and the human controlled ones, everybody should still at least know what's going on and have that level of alignment. Everything that they need should all be online. So all your documentation and your procedures, make sure that's all there. And if we've got to build into this sort of stuff that the monitoring and the in-flight activities is remote as much as possible. So the mission control has a really good situational awareness of what's going on at the mission as well, without having to resort to talking to the crew if for whatever reason, because it might not just be that they don't want to talk to them. There might be, as you say, that they're so heads down in the task they're doing and surviving, because they're going to be in that sort of survival mode. But there's also other issues as well, and I don't know if you've got any thoughts around. So I don't know, maintenance and logistics.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing where I think this autonomy comes from, is because you have they're trained to basically work on the stuff that they need to fix while they're out there, because you can't send a technician to fix these specialized tools or these specialized programs or anything that they're using. So you need to train the astronauts to do that. And I feel like that type of autonomy to be able to fix something that you are working with is a big contributor to some of this feeling of wanting to be autonomous. I don't need mission control because I was trained on this. I know it. And we're kind of downplaying the training that astronauts get, and the selection process for who gets to go on these missions is very carefully selected, because it is a real important concern, and that's why we do these tests on Earth before we do the real thing, because personality factors have a large impact on this. And in terms of some of the training bits, right? You're training these users for normal events, normal repair, normal replacements of parts and pieces. You're also training them for unusual circumstances. What happens if a sandstorm comes through? What happens if a completely unlikely event happens, and an asteroid hits Mars or something? I don't know. They probably don't receive training on that. I think at that point you're just kind of we'll fly by the seat of our pants because it's incredibly unlikely. But they are trained to kind of adapt and respond to these situations, and maybe that empowers them to feel less dependent on mission control for some things. But let's talk about crew performance. Do you want to dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting, isn't it, to have the how we're going to monitor the way that the crew actually perform, and what does it mean to be performing at an optimum level when you're on another planet? Because there's a whole lot of different bits that come into play. So when we're designing, we've got to make sure that we pull in the human reliability data, because if we don't design for optimum reliability, then you're so far away, and literally you are like going to be years away from being able to get kit redesigned. We've got to get it right first time, i.e., right before we before we leave Earth. But also, there's just the whole difference in the planet itself. So obviously, a Mars day is longer than an Earth day, which is something that is so in-baked into us. It's a bit like gravity. You know, we're just so used to gravity that was a big step for when we went into space, was just the idea of actually how do you survive in a zero G environment. You have to do lots of exercise because your bone density starts going, etc., etc. We're going to have issues with your body's going to want to react to the Martian day. So what does that mean if your day is longer? What does that mean to your circadian rhythms and your sleep patterns and things like that? So how we perform in what could be seen as a more stressy environment, just purely because of the length of the day. Yeah, that's going to have surely going to have a big impact, and that's going to be something that's going to be quite hard to model on Earth, because of the nature of we're on Earth and we have the Earth day. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the differences in planetary environment affect our crew performance.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the isolation piece and the confinement piece, right? Because we're sticking humans in a tube and sending them all the way to Mars and sticking them in a base where that's the only place in which they can
Mm.
be fully, uh human. Otherwise they have to have some sort of exosuit that protects them from the environment. And so we're talking about confined spaces, we're talking about isolation. So let's think about isolation, confinement. So, as we're looking into moving astronauts into the deep space, we're starting to look at some of these new stressors, right? This extreme isolation is something that we've not really, as humanity, had to deal with before, right? The furthest we've gone is the moon, and really, with that, I think it was uh, the people that were chosen for moon missions were very carefully selected. Took a certain kind of individual to go there, right? And so, um, I think there is a lot more uh, care and consideration that goes into that than people realize. So you're looking at sort of traits like adaptability and resiliency for people to live in these close quarters, and like you talked about, right? These stressors kind of impact the body and mind in several different ways. So we're looking at isolation and confinement. This is almost like solitary confinement in a way, where you are given tasks to not go crazy. Um and that just worsens over time. Uh kind of becomes a occupational hazard for someone like working on a submarine, right? That's kind of a apt comparison. They are underwater for weeks, months at a time,
Mm.
and depending on the length of the mission, and so it's like that's kind of as close as we can come to understanding what some of these effects might have here on Earth. I don't. Do you want to use that as a segue to go into some of the other stuff here?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues, couple points that is good to raise on this. Is this because you could actually do, when you go through your selection process, you could actually select people who are better at being in isolation, which on the face of it would make a lot of sense, because people who can be in isolation, then put them in an isolated environment. But if you're then using that as a springboard to start the Mars mission proper, so obviously the Mars mission proper really is to, start the colony on Mars and reproduce and do all that sort of stuff. If you've got a whole bunch of people who don't talk very well with others, start colonizing a planet, does that mean the entire planet will stop talking to everybody else because they're all very antisocial and just very inward looking rather than everything else?
Is that the planetary
Um,
culture?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So do you sort of breed that through? I think that whole piece will be really fascinating. And we talk about we mentioned it a few times so far around the training and things like that, then the way that you're selected as as an astronaut, and no matter which country you're coming from. But one of the recent missions that I thought was completely fascinating was the Inspiration 4 mission with SpaceX, and they chose 4 civilians to do that. But even then, they chose 4 civilians at some at random, some not. And actually, we could probably talk about it could be an entirely new episode about the selection process, because I thought that was absolutely fascinating. But they still had to go through quite a significant amount of training just to be able to do it. It's not like they could say, right, you're chosen, jump on, away you go. There's still an awful lot of work to be done. So we've still got a long way to go with the whole training piece.
Can you imagine if they did just throw people on a spaceship and say, "Go,
Yes,
see
please.
what happened"? Like that would be a completely unethical experiment. But
Would you go? Would if somebody I mean, it's the $1 million question. If somebody said to you, Nick, tomorrow we've got a spare seat. Do you fancy being on the first trip to Mars? Would you go?
right, well, yes, but like at the same time, it's like I don't know how to survive G-force without passing out, right? So like I'd wake up in space, like what? It's,
Yeah, G-force is a mine. I mean, it's surely it's a small thing to deal with.
and then what would I do?
It's
Like
very
I'm
typical.
there, and I mean, yeah, count me in, but like at the same time, there's a lot that I'd want to know going into it. I don't know.
I'm getting questions afterwards after I'm strapped in, and okay, what does this button do then? But just press go. It's fine. That's I'd love it. I think I'd absolutely love it. It's rather sad, isn't it? Anyway, so
Did you want to take this next point, or did you want me to take it?
no, you take it. Go for it.
Okay. All right. So let's jump back to sort of real world examples, right? You talked about the mission selection, but I think we talked about the instance where you have sort of the submarines being the real world example. I think a lot of this can also be, service members on long deployments. That's another good example of this type of thing. Um, and what we find with those service members on those long deployments, they crave some of the basic human needs, right? Like smell of grass, sight of a sunny day, feel of their feet on the earth, the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take away those familiar experiences and put them in a metal tube or put them on a ship where they can't necessarily feel those things, like on a ship, you can go out on the deck occasionally and feel the sun, but then you're out in the middle of the ocean. It's not much to do. When you do that, it really impacts a person's motivation. And over extended period of times, it can affect their ability to make decisions, right? If they're um, sort of being ground down and worn down, then their decision making is impaired. And you combine you combine that with the other inherent issues of space flight, like gravity and radiation. And when you combine that with isolation and confinement, this is a huge mixing pot of psychological hardships that is really dangerous for people in space. And so that's what we're talking about here with this isolation confinement of people in metal tubes in space. There's a lot that goes into it from the human factors perspective. So let's get back to the article. And just to reiterate, right, this article is indicating that in a mission here on Earth, Mars base astronauts are effectively creating their own autonomy from mission control, and they're doing all this tasking without necessarily communicating with mission control in the way that we want them to. And it all comes back to that situation awareness. Do we want to have some examples here of maybe what this looks like in the real world today? Because we do have astronauts up in the International Space Station right now.
Yeah, we do, and they spend large parts of their day communicating with people on Earth in mission control in Houston. They talk with scientists, the doctors, the reporters. They'll do live streaming. They'll do. In fact, I think they have better internet connectivity up there than potentially we do down here. they talk to students, family, friends, all that. They've got constant engagement going on all the time, and without very much delay either. So it does happen really quite quickly. That luxury, that ability to do almost that real-time communication, you will, when you start off on the Mars mission, then and you launch, that'll be fine for a certain period of time. But actually, when you get further and further away, that time delay becomes much bigger. And so when you're on Mars itself, that is going to be a big drama, because you're looking at a significant chunk of time. You can't have a normal conversation. You're gone. It's a fire and forget, wait and then wait for replies over a number of minutes, if not longer. So that's going to be really significant.
Jumping in on that time communication. So that's something we didn't even talk about here, but we did talk about this when we were talking about the human factors of basically flying a helicopter on Mars. I think it was early 200 episodes if you want to go check out that episode. But we were talking about times anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes of delay, depending on the distance between Earth and Mars at any given point. So if you're thinking about a conversation, you give a chunk of a conversation that gets sent to mission control. 5 minutes later, they get it. And that's at best case scenario. And then they hear it, they perceive it, they respond to it. And then 5 minutes later, it goes back to the astronauts. So they are getting something back at best case scenario, 10 minutes after they sent it. At worst case scenario, probably like an hour. Or even more if they need to research the answer here on Earth. There can be an acknowledgement. Hey, request acknowledged. We're researching it. We'll send you back an answer when we have more. Expected time 4 hours. Something like that. So that way there's something to keep them going. But yes, when you're having that time delay, that's huge. That is huge. And when you're thinking about that in terms of the psychological impacts to astronauts, you're also not just communicating, like you said, with doctors and reporters and students, but you're communicating with family. And so what does it mean to have those conversations with family that are so delayed like that? It's effectively sending voicemails back and forth. And it's not really a conversation at that point. It's just canned messages that you need to kind of prepare. And, you get it. Or let's say, I think there are situations in place where family can't send bad news if they get it while an astronaut is out there. But, that's something that the astronaut can probably read on their family members if something's not okay. And so it might eat at them if they can't ask clarifying questions like, hey, you all right? Like, what's going on? And I feel like that's a huge impact. So look, we talked a lot about astronauts themselves, the mission, but I think there's some really valuable things that we can use here on Earth. I mean, we already talked about some of the examples, like being in a tube or being in a ship for some of these service people. And so, do you want to talk about some of these real world examples?
Yeah, so like you say, there are a lot of situations that we do find ourselves in where you've got a small number of people around you, and you have to cut yourself off from the outside world for whatever reason. So we mentioned the military, submariners. You've got anywhere up to say 150 odd people crammed within a small tube. So there's a lot of people there, but you can't do much with it. So you've got to learn to basically live in each other's pockets. To make that work. You've got anything with sort of high risk environments. So that could be anything from, again, soldiers being deployed, but actually through to, say, nuclear cleanup, like things like Chernobyl and things like that, where you've got to cut yourself off and make things happen. We've got things like drone operators. They're operating craft on the other side of the world in different places, but from a very from a place where you don't actually have that much comms around you. So there is lots of examples here that we can learn from, and also deploy the learning from these experiments too. But also NASA's doing a fair amount of research themselves on mitigating the effects of isolation and confinement, because that's also relevant to increase our understanding of these issues, not only for NASA's own aims, but actually looking at facing the aging population here on Earth. we're going to have, as you get older, you become more isolated. You lose friends, you lose family, and things like that. And you do see some of them things coming around already, and that's before you get into their own mobility issues. And so they can't get out as much as they did anymore, and they don't have the same access to family and friends. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that is really, really relevant, not only to the space race and our activities down there, but actually makes we can really distill some of them lessons for our own day-to-day living.
Yeah, I think so. We'll just have to see what the future will hold. I think this is a great story. So thank you to our patrons and the general public this week for selecting our topic. And thank you to our friends over at Futurism and CNET for our news story this week. We got sources from both of them. If you want to follow along, join me on office hours when I do them, where I find these news stories, and we do post the links to the original articles on our weekly roundups on our blog. You can join us on our Slack or Discord for more discussion on these stories. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back to see what's going on in the Human Factors community right after this.
Human Factors Cast brings you the best in human factors news, interviews, conference coverage, and overall fun conversations into each and every episode we produce. But we can't do it without you. The Human Factors Cast network is 100% listener supported. All the funds that go into running the show come from our listeners. Our patrons are our priority, and we want to ensure we're giving back to you for supporting us. Pledges start at just $1 per month and include rewards like access to our weekly Q&As with the hosts, personalized professional reviews, and Human Factors Minute, a Patreon-only weekly podcast where the hosts break down unique, obscure, and interesting human factors topics in just 1 minute. Patreon rewards are always evolving, so stop by patreon.com/humanfactorscast to see what support level may be right for you. Thank you, and remember, it depends.
Yes, huge thank you as always to our patrons. Especially want to thank our honorary Human Factors Cast staff patron, Michelle Tripp. Patrons like you keep the show running. Thank you all so much for your continued support. Now, our treasurer got back to me and said, you're doing a great job not talking about Patreon during the commercial. So we're going to continue that trend. They gave me something else to talk about. And I want to talk about our website. It's been a while since we've actually talked about our website, and there's a bunch of fun stuff over there. I don't know if you all know this, but we have detailed show notes, including links to any guests that were on this week. So you can always find Mr. Barry Kirby over there, linked up to any of these episodes. You can find more information about him. We also have embedded YouTube videos, so you can see how handsome he is. If you're regularly an audio listener, you can see his beautiful mug and my ugly mug. And of course, we always have our news roundups out there. Like I said, we do those weekly and monthly. So that's a great resource for you all if you're looking to stay up to date with what's going on in the human factors field. Even if you just listen to this episode and want to keep up with the news, we do publish those every week. Like I said, we have additional information on our guests. We even have ways for you, the listener, to support the show by submitting your own stories. This is a way in which we get notified of some of the research that's out there. Maybe our sources miss it, and that happens from time to time where something big happens and we kind of it doesn't make it into our news stories, but we know about it from other ways. There's that. You can search through all of our episodes. We have a pretty robust search feature, so if you're looking for answers to specific questions, we do It Came Froms every week, and so sometimes your question might be answered, and we're working on collecting a backlog of the questions that we've answered and publishing those separately, so that way they're resources for you all. But if you need to go and look for them, that's another way you can do it. We have full conference recaps of stuff that we've done and covered. So if it's been a minute since you've checked out our website, go check it out. Take a look. Anyway, that's going to be that. Now we get into this next part of the show that we like to call
It came from.
Yes, that's right. It came from. This week, it's all Reddit. This is the part of the show where we search all over the internet to bring you topics the community's talking about. If you find these answers useful, give us a like wherever you're at to help other people find this content. So we have 3 tonight, and I think these are great ones. So let's just go ahead and get into them one by one. This first one here is from scrndude on the user experience subreddit. They write, "How do you get past your mind not wanting to do any work? I have client feedback to review, Figma files to revise, research interviews to synthesize, LinkedIn messages to reply to, but I get completely exhausted from just opening a file. Anyone have tricks to help push through and get things done when they're feeling like their tank is empty and running on fumes?" Barry, how do you tackle this burnout problem?
Oh, this is almost a daily problem, I think, at times. I think it's one of these things that you let things pile up so much, and then it gets to the point where you just can't touch it because you're paralysis. You just get paralyzed by it. So I sort of have 2 or 3 different techniques. If it's just getting through the day, caffeine. Firstly, a good pot of coffee is a great driver to get you going. But fundamentally, actually, I find creating a list, creating a simple checklist of things that you need to get done, and don't think that you can solve everything in the world in one day. Try and segment it out. It does require a bit organized, and I'm not exactly brilliant at practicing what I preach, but I do find that if I've got to that point where I know I need to get stuff done, and I can be really one of them people that can put things off, especially if I know I've got a big deadline looming, like my desk needs tidied and all that sort of stuff. We all do it. It's just natural. Create a list, work out what you can nail in the day. Don't give yourself too hard a time if you don't make it. Make things achievable. So yeah, make a list and work out, pick maybe 2 or 3 things to achieve either in the day or maybe in the morning, whatever it is, so you can see ticking them things off. Actually, a really good there was a YouTube video about I think it was a Marine colonel or a general or something saying, if you want to be successful in life, the first thing you should do is make your bed. And brilliant advice, because actually, if you get up, you make your bed, you've completed a task for the day, you've achieved something. And even if you have the worst day in the world, you go back to a freshly made bed. And yeah,
That's some great advice.
I've loved it. I saw it on YouTube like ages ago, and I've always stuck with it. I don't make my bread very often, but I give it out as free advice to other people.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think you gave a lot of good advice that I would agree with. I think obviously the list is one thing that I go to, and I jokingly in the pre-show said that when you're overwhelmed, you just go to your bed, curl up in a ball, and cry until you realize that you got to get stuff done. And I think one of the biggest drivers is to here's my strategy. I always tell other people what I'm doing, and I give them what I think are realistic deadlines for those things. And so now I've communicated a deadline external to myself. So other people are expecting that thing at that time, and that pushes me to get something done. Now, if you're feeling comfortable with that, if you feel like you're not overburdened with work, you can certainly push up those timelines and try to get through more stuff, so that way it doesn't pile up on you. But that's one place of success that I've always had. If you come up with some sort of timeline, and kind of build yourself a roadmap over the next 12 months of what needs to get done, right? Because then you can start that from that list of things that need to get done over the next 12 months. You can chunk that out and say, okay, well, 6 months from now, what do I need to get to there? What do I need to get to do next week? And you have all this stuff to do, and it seems insurmountable when you put it all together. But if you start assigning dates next to those line items, then it becomes much more manageable, because you're effectively triaging your list, and you're prioritizing, and that process of prioritizing and triaging everything that you need to do. Well, maybe I don't need to do those Figma files right away. Maybe that can wait till next week. Maybe this client feedback review actually feeds into something that I need to do 2 weeks from now. And so I should probably do that, so that way it's ready to go. And the research interviews, that actually plays into the client feedback. So maybe I do that first and then the client feedback. So it all kind of becomes more clear when you can start to set these deadlines for yourself. And the big part, like I said, communicate it externally, so other people know when to expect that. You've now put a deadline on it, and make it realistic. Make it realistic. That's the most critical part of this advice, is make it realistic. Otherwise, you won't be able to stick to it yourself, and that doesn't help anybody. It just makes you look bad. Any other thoughts on that one, Barry?
Yeah, just self-honesty. If things are going pear-shaped, then You just be honest with yourself and know that you've got to rejig your plan. Otherwise, you'll throw the entire plan away. And then you're almost back in a worst case because you feel like you failed. Be honest with yourself. If things aren't getting done, that's fine. Just reschedule it, redo it.
Yep. Agree. All right, let's get into this next one here. Counteroffers. This one's written by Biography Biology on the Human Factors subreddit. Hey, all, I live in the Boston area. I have a master's in human factors and ergonomics and a bachelor's in psych. I graduated my master's this past summer. I was just offered a position in medical device sector, coming in at, I'm just going to say a certain amount, just to make this generalized, at a certain amount with a certain amount of bonus, a 5% bonus. Currently, I'm working as a UX researcher, as a contractor in the life sciences. So about the same amount if it was a year-long contract. However, it was only a 12-week contract. I previously interned in medical device and pharma. What are your all thoughts on counter offering? Should I go perhaps up 5%? I see mixed reviews in traditional engineering forums about counter offering. You're at your first real job, run the risk of the company rescinding their offer altogether. You don't have much leverage, etc. Should I just take what's on the table and put some time under my belt? This is a medical robotics division. Just curious about differing perspectives. Cheers. So, Barry, this is somebody fresh out of school. They are approaching a job. They don't know how to value their worth or how to even counter something. How would you go about this, or what advice would you give?
So a bit of advice I was given a while ago is always turn down the first offer. However, I think that needs to be caveated. So the whole reason you turn down the first offer really is generally, certainly if you're newer to the field, shall we say, it's generally within the company's interest to offer to basically lowball you a bit and see if they can get away with getting you on board for a bit cheaper than what they budgeted for, what they anticipated, because we all try and get a bargain, don't we? So we shouldn't really expect companies to be any different. So on that perspective, I think it is generally a fairly decent idea to say thank you very much for the offer, really great. However, I think the numbers are a bit low. Put in a counter offer, maybe of it depends what it is that you either genuinely feel it's a really low offer, at which point then what you then counter with what you think is a reasonable offer, or if you're just trying to eke out that little bit more, then it's kind of down to how you feel. However, there's a flip side to the argument as well, in that if you really think it is a good offer, or if you think it's a good offer for what your circumstances are and you think it's appropriate, you don't have to necessarily counter just for the sake of countering. Fundamentally, it's all about having appreciation of what you're worth and what you need. And so if you have, before you go in for some roles, or when you get an offer like that, have a discussion, have a chat. I think we've mentioned when we've answered similar questions previously, we have an absolute fascination of hiding salaries from each other, and some companies, more so in the UK, I think, because I think we mentioned in the US you can't actually do that, about promoting what different people are on and that type of thing. We should have more open and honest conversations about value and worth, because I remember when I first started running my own consultancy, I struggled to understand how to value my time, and therefore what should I be pitching my numbers at. I'm 10 years in now, and even now I sometimes do struggle with that, particularly with new fields and new clients. So I think for my own summary is generally reject the first offer and ask for more, because generally we try and lowball people, but don't be greedy. I think if you don't just go for extra cash just because you think you can, and that's probably more people who are further on in their career. But what about you, Nick? What do you think? Am I wrong?
I think that's great advice. I think the caveats that you've listed are appropriate. I think first job out of school, it's probably okay to come back, asking for a couple thousand more. I don't think. Look, the company wants to hire you. You made it through the process. They have given you an offer. They want you on their team. And so unless you give them something completely unreasonable, at which point you just turn down the offer. Unless you give them something completely unreasonable, I think it's in their best interest to at least try to meet that. And if they can't, they'll be honest with you and say, it's just really not in our budget. We've already tried our hardest to get you as much as we can. They'll be honest about it. And if they're a good, transparent company. And so, yes, I think if you want to come at it from that perspective, come with a couple extra thousand. But if you don't want to risk it, I don't really see that happening, honestly. If I've been directly involved in the hiring process for a while, and I've never had that happen where somebody either came back with a little bit more. It's either we've already offered them as much as we could, or we, at least in my case, we've already hired offered them as much as we could, or we just didn't offer enough for what they were looking for and they turned it down. It happens. It's just a part of this negotiation. It's a contract between you and the employer that says, hey, this is how much we value your work. This is how much I value my work. And you're just trying to meet somewhere in the middle. And I think, like you said, there's larger questions if you're further on in your career and, it's in the tens of thousands difference. That's a tougher situation. I think in this situation, 5%, that's not a big deal. If it's in the budget and they're able to do it, if they really want you, they'll do it. I don't see you upsetting a company. Like, I don't know. I don't know. You've hired people too. Like I've just never had that happen where I've seen somebody come back with, a couple thousand and I'm like, can we do this? Can we do this? I really want this person. Can we make this happen? Is there any way that we can find that in the budget? Because this person is great. I want them here. They're on it. They're even fresh out of school. Like they know their stuff. They're, they seem like a great student and a great person to get along with. They're going to gel with the environment. Let's do it. I don't know. As somebody who's in that hiring process, I would want to try my hardest to accommodate that, because that is what they're asking for. And unless they came back with, like, hey, I'm expecting, 30,000 more than you offered, then I'd be like, I'm really sorry. That's completely out of the budget. We can't make that happen. If your priorities change or something happens in the future, please let us know, that type of thing. But I guess that don't be greedy comes in a couple thousand.
I think in many ways, if a company, if you went and asked for more from the company and the company just turned you down flat and said, no, it's not happening anymore, then you probably didn't want to work there anyway. Actually,
exactly.
Opening up the conversation about being open and honest about what your expectations are. And I think this does actually apply quite significantly more to women than it does to men as well.
Agree.
Because it is quite well known and quite well researched that that men are more likely to ask for a raise than a woman is. And so I think we need to encourage them sort of conversations. So if you're in the hiring position and, you almost want to encourage the women to get in on your team, and encourage them conversations about salary and stuff. So to make sure that you are offering something that is tangible for them.
Yeah. So. All right. Let's get into this last one here. This one's by Budget Iron 7551. It's a throwaway account on the user experience subreddit. Dealing with difficult clients. I'm currently dealing with a set of clients who don't know what they want, expect perfection, see their job as tearing down the work, micromanage, redo the work, ignore the strategy, waste their own budget, move the goalposts, are afraid of making mistakes. In spite of these difficulties, the team is doing exceptional work, but it's slow going, expensive, and sometimes demoralizing. Looking for your best and worst war stories and enter any tips you may have for dealing with exceptionally difficult clients. Barry, what are your war stories, and how do you deal with somebody like this?
War stories I probably should avoid. Well, no, actually, there has been a number of times where, and it's interesting, projects will go really, really well, and then suddenly they start going a bit pear-shaped because people suddenly start demanding things that are either out of scope or out of remit, or maybe expectations weren't laid out clearly to begin with. And I've sort of been in, I was in a position where we got asked to build a prototype database to do some significant amount of analysis. The technical expert who was working with us on the client side, they went off, and so we were left with just a project manager. And that project manager didn't really know what they were looking at, and suddenly started demanding all sorts of things like software compliance records, release material, it to be completely tested and all that sort of thing. And all we were meant to be providing was a piece of prototype software, not a fully finished product. And so we suddenly got into that situation where I was like, well, hold on, you're asking for loads here. You're not actually paying us to do this. We've already done, et cetera, et cetera. And it started getting really abrasive. So the way I dealt with that in the end is all the way through the project, as friendly as you might be with your clients and things like that, always keep your paper trails. Always keep any decisions, make sure any decisions that you've made or not, write them down, make sure that they, at least keep them sort of records. But fundamentally, you've got to set up the right behaviors and the right attitudes right from the off with the project. And we've had this, we've had another project as well, which was kind of almost as described with this problem, because we had clients who were not necessarily that au fait with what the realities of what they were asking were, and we were quite clear right at the beginning, right? These are the user stories we're going to be doing. This is the scoping of what we're going to be doing. This is what you could expect. This is the outline. But when you get stuck into it, it's very much of they keep on coming back wanting it to be absolutely perfect. And we're only going for our alpha beta release, but they wanted to be like sort of fully polished rather than just get out on the market. And we had to, but that's at the time where you have to get your big trousers on, and actually, rather than just trying to bunker down and hope it goes away, which is kind of your mentality. You kind of do want to do that. You want to sort of sit down and say, oh, hopefully they'll stop doing this soon. You've actually got to, nip it in the bud and actually call that meeting and say, look, we see what you want to do. We know you want a perfect product straight away, but you're not there. You're either, the amount you're funding into the project isn't enough. The amount, this is where and why. This is what your expectation was to begin with, and this is where we're at. You've got to have discussions. You've got to talk, and it can be really, really difficult to do. But yeah, chat to your clients and bring them on board.
Yeah, open communication is key there. I think. Look, like there's there's two different conversations, right? There's going off the path that you initially set forth, which I think is a different discussion. You give the client what they want. But if they have these demands like expecting perfection and they continuously tear down your work and micromanage, I mean, look, at that point, if they are micromanaging and redoing the work, ignoring the strategy, wasting their budget, they're the ones doing that. Look, like there's always something to be said about keeping relationships for future work. But I mean, do you want that future work if this client is like this to work with in the beginning? So that's another consideration that you have to take into it. Maybe just get through the job, find other sources elsewhere. Like it, as a human factors practitioner, as a UX person, this can be a very difficult thing to try to reconcile with a product where you know what's best for the user because you've talked to them, understand what they want, what they need. The client wants something different, and you have to negotiate between those two parties. Look, ultimately you are working for somebody, and if they want one thing and the user wants another, do your best, pick your battles where it's going to matter most. Otherwise, ultimately the people who are paying you are the ones responsible for money in your pocket. So it's a sucky answer, but that's kind of how it is. Anyway, How about that for an ending? Why don't we get into one more thing? This needs no introduction. This is just where we have a chance to talk about one more thing. Barry, what is your one more thing this week?
Well, okay, so I've got my to go off piece and talk about my own podcast a second. We've got the 1202 final Christmas special being recorded next week, and what we're doing is it's sort of stealing the idea from you, so you should feel a certain sense of ownership
Pride
over
and
this.
accomplishment.
But
Yeah.
yeah. No, we're going to try and go through our back catalogue of around 40 odd episodes and work out what our favorite episodes are. So myself and a colleague who I work with, Joe Paulson, we're going to sit down and work our top 5 each. But what I'm asking people on our social media to do is to then give us some insights of what are their favorite episodes. And so this might lead us into some sort of annual thing where we rate the episodes from the year. But as I've done this before, it's like, go for it, all 40. Let's just pick the top 5. So it's going to be interesting next week. I think we'll see what some of those see what some of them episodes are.
Yeah, might hurt somebody's feelings if they don't make the top 5. But I hear all of our listeners here at Human Factors Cast really liked that episode that you did with that feller from that fine program. So,
don't know which one you mean, mate.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I don't either. Well, so my one more thing this week, I'm actually getting back in the swing of doing stuff for myself. We moved earlier this year, and with that, I lost a lot of, I guess, time or commitment to my own personal like reading backlog, right? So I've been reading a lot of books and comics again and starting to get back into that, because you can see on my shelf behind me, there's like 4 books that I haven't read yet. I have like 100 and something odd issues of comics to catch up on. And I've started slowly doing that night after night. And I've made it a point to at least do one chapter or one issue every night just to get back into the swing of things. And it has been, it's been really refreshing to kind of count on that every night, just to kind of progress a little bit, right? It's that making your bed in the morning, but except I'm doing it in the evening right before bed.
Yeah. That's legit.
Anyway, that's it for today, everyone. If you like this episode and enjoy some of the challenges of working in space, we actually invite you to go check out episode 221. We took a look at using augmented reality to assist with some of those repairs in space. Give us a comment wherever you're listening of what you think of the story this week. For more in-depth discussion, you can always join us on our Slack or Discord communities and visit our official website, like I gave all those fantastic examples of. Join our newsletter, stay up to date with all the latest Human Factors news. If you like what you hear, you want to support the show, there's a couple things you can do. 1, wherever you're at, you can leave us a 5-star review. That is free for you to do. 2, tell your friends about us. Word of mouth really helps the show grow. And 3, if you have the financial means, it is the spirit of giving. I don't know. Don't do that. Anyway, give somewhere else. We don't need it. But if you want to, we have a patron for that. As always, links to all of our socials and our website are in the description of this episode. I want to thank Mr. Barry Kirby for being on the show today. Where can our listeners go and find you if they want to vote on their favorite 1202 podcast episode?
So they can find us I'm on Twitter at Baz_K, but also you can find their 1202 Human Factors podcast website even, hello, on 1202podcast.com. I think it's about time for us to finish.
I think so too. I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me streaming on Twitch for office hours occasionally and across social media at Nick_Roome. Thanks again for tuning into Human Factors Cast. Until next time,
it depends.